and I didn't want to be the stupid American, like me in crisis in Uganda. Like, I'm not the one in crisis here. I'm never trying to take myself too seriously. So I really always try to make fun of myself.
Joining us today is the incredible Alok Vaid Menon, writer, performer, and public speaker whose work challenges the boundaries of gender, fashion, and self-expression. Their work has inspired audiences globally, urging us to rethink the way we see ourselves and each other. So the first
Sure.
question I have is, how did you arrive at the theme for your show? It's a really unique name, Hairy Situation. And what's the hairiest situation you've ever found yourself in?
Um, so I'm a hairy person, and my entire
Right.
life, people have always made fun of me or commented on my body hair. And it's been so frustrating because there's been so many different chapters of it, self-acceptance, feeling insecure. And then I thought about how actually the situation right now for trans people in the US is a hairy situation, meaning like thorny, vexed, complicated. And so I just thought, oh, these two things can come together. So it's a show about body hair, yes, but it's also a show about being trans in a world that doesn't want us to be there. And what I'm trying to do is use comedy as a way to explore what often can feel like shameful or painful experiences. And the hairiest situation I've ever been on, there have been so many, but this one's really funny. Okay.
Go on.
I was performing in Kampala, Uganda a few years ago, and it was an incredible show. I was meeting so many amazing LGBTQ people, and then I got locked in the bathroom. And
Stop.
it was in the middle of a community barbecue, so everyone was outside celebrating, and I was shaking the door
Oh no.
trying my best to get out. I didn't have my phone. No one was hearing me because the music was blasting. And I didn't want to be the stupid American, like me in crisis in Uganda. Like, I'm not the one in crisis here, but I'm stuck in the bathroom. And I eventually have to kick the door open.
Oh
And then I
wow.
just completely act as if, like, oh, everything was normal. I
Fine,
don't
just like
mention it. I don't tell anyone it.
and you come from a really long line of knowledgeable people. Your grandfather, your mom, your aunt. Could you please share a bit about your family and how that has sort of influenced who you are today?
Yeah. My grandfather was a playwright and novelist named Krishna Baldev from India, and my aunt Urvashi was a celebrated lesbian activist and writer, and my mom is an amazing scholar and feminist unto her own. So and on my dad's side as well, there have been a lot of teachers, so I've always been around knowledge and art, and some of my earliest memories are going to India with my grandparents, and it taught me that being an artist could be a career trajectory.
And through your hashtag Degender Fashion initiative, you've also challenged a lot of traditional fashion norms. So, are you able to share a pivotal moment that sort of inspired you to emerge with fashion as a form of activism?
I actually had the opportunity to design some collections of fashion when I was living in India,
Hmm.
and that really changed my entire point of view because I could go and source the fabrics, source the buttons, and that project was really important to me because in it, I started to research the history of fashion in India, and I learned that actually draping was across genders, that people across genders were wearing, and so much of the distinction between men's fashion and women's fashion was actually a byproduct of colonialism. And we come from a culture where adornment was gender neutral, where men would be wearing jewelry, all of these things. I started to familiarize myself with the history of Indian aesthetics and work on my own clothes. What I realized is that my commitment to degendering fashion isn't just about me being queer or trans, it's also about me being Indian and learning our own histories of textiles, our own histories of garments. and men shouldn't wear skirts. I'm like, what does that mean when I'm Malayali and the men in my family wore lungis all my entire life?
Mhm.
And from a Western point of view, that would be considered something feminine, or why are you doing that? But for us, that totally doesn't make sense. Like, what is our frame of reference when we're talking about fashion and gender?
Now going over to your comedy. So your comedy is both deeply personal, and also playfully absurd. So how do you sort of balance humor with the weight of discussing identity, particularly when being trans and Indian comes with its own set of societal expectations?
I'm never trying to take myself too seriously. So I really always try to make fun of myself because I'm a water sign, which means that I feel emotions so deeply. If I allow myself to feel too fully, then it's off the deep end. So humor is such a great way to keep me in check, and I haven't always been that way. I think in my 20s, I was like super emo all the time, but then in my 30s, I'm kind of like, I want to have a good life, you know? And as a water sign, that's really hard when you're just like grieving the smallest things all the time.
Yeah.
So comedy is kind of my life raft that keeps me afloat and allows me to still have my feet in the emotions, but then sort of reminds me actually like I get to be worthy of joy and expansion.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And you do a little bit of everything. So you've got comedy, you've got fashion, but you also do art. And historically, art has sort of been used both as a site of protest, but also sometimes as a tool for propaganda. So do you see your own work as political, or do you sort of resist that sort of generalization?
I think all art is political. And what I get concerned by is when people just look at artists produced by minorities and say, oh, this is political. But even like white straight artists who are just making art about the landscape, that's still political because we live in a world in which everything is politicized. And coming to you from a country where there's a federal attempt to disappear trans and gender nonconforming people right now, that increasingly I'm afraid that I won't even be able to exist in public spaces, let alone perform. So even if I go up and I make a poem about daisies, that's still political because of who I am. I've never had the luxury to just be seen for my craft. I'm always linked to what's going on in the world. And sometimes that makes me sad because I wish that I could just be an artist. But then I remember that actually, like the artists that I've always admired are people who speak to the times.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up because that was also one of my questions because when I was watching Trump's inaugural speech, he said that he would make it the government's policy to only have two genders, male and female. He vowed to sign an executive order that would end transgender rights in the military and also in schools. And he also said that he would stop the participation of trans athletes in women's sports. As an advocate of gender fluidity and acceptance, are there now projects that or areas of advocacy that aim to sort of address this for you? And how do you sort of envision the next phase of your career sort of contributing to the societal change?
Here's the genuine truth. I have no idea what the future is in store for us. Um, it feels really nice to be outside of the US for a while, because I think there's a lot of palpable fear. And part of it is just we have no idea. We have no idea if these are going to be contested in the court, if this is going to give more permission for people to attack us in person, because it was never about the law. What this is state-sanctioned transphobia, which gives permission for vigilante violence. So now, in so many ways, people feel emboldened to come and physically intimidate us and harass us. I don't know what the future is for my community. And that's a very vulnerable place to be in because we have been making so many gains and so much progress over the past few years. And now a lot of that is being rolled back. What I will say is that I come from two communities who have long histories of resistance, both Indian and trans. And I can resource those histories to understand that my communities have survived impossible conditions and found ways to be resilient in the face of incredible adversity. And so I don't have fear that we won't make it through this. I think that we will, but I don't know how serious it's going to be and how that's going to mean that I have to shift my life. And part of what I'm so looking forward to being in Australia is it's really important now that we all feel connected to one another because what's happening in the US could happen in Australia and vice versa. And I'm really looking forward to remembering that like the community that I'm a part of is not defined by my country of origin or by my gender or even by my race. It's defined by people who dream of a better world. And that's what I genuinely feel when I do my shows all across the world is that people in my crowd are such generous, kind, compassionate, open-hearted people. And I think seeing one another in that crowd gives people hope too, because the news can feel so alienating and painful right now.
My last question, in the digital age, identity is also increasingly customized for public consumption, especially with all the social media going around and different platforms. So do you think the sort of commercialization of queerness online sort of dilutes or sort of diminishes the entire movement?
What I would say is there's a way in which physical spaces for queer people are disappearing. Our neighborhoods, our clubs, our venues, our
Oh,
concert halls, because the online has supplemented the physical. So now we have an entire generation of people whose community is mediated through TikTok and not how it used to be, which was having to go to a community center or a meeting. And while I believe that those digital spaces are so important because that's what I had access to as a young person before I could have in-person community, I don't think it's a substitute for in-person community and space. And
mm,
I'm concerned that community centers, which offer life-affirming services, healthcare, housing, counseling, psychological support, domestic violence support, those things are all being underfunded because people think that an AI chatbot is similar to having like a mentor or a safe space. And I don't think that they are.
mm,
And so I do worry that while the internet has created so much more potential to spread information and to feel connected, we can't abandon the need for physical space. And that's so much of why I tour in person. I could just, post my performance clips online, but I don't think that's the same thing as bringing people together and making them feel like they're part of something greater than themselves. I'm a big believer that when we come together in person and when we claim space together, that has the potential to heal us in a way that's more transformative. And what I would also say is what we've seen, especially now in the US, but and kind of increasingly across the world, is many people see support of the LGBTQ community as an aesthetic. So during Pride, they'll change their logos to a rainbow flag or they'll signal virtue. But I do feel like one of the things that the internet has facilitated is a kind of performative allyship that doesn't actually translate into meaningful investment and support in our community. And we have to push back on that because right now the straits are really dire and the stakes are really dire. And what we really need is for everyone to be showing support, even when it's not politically expedient.
yeah, no, definitely. And you bring up Mardi Gras as well. So you're coming down to Australia during Feb. Our Mardi Gras is on the 1st. So would you be going there? Would you have time to do take part in Mardi Gras?
Yes, I'm planning on going.
Oh, so excited. I'll be there as well. So if we see each other, we'll definitely say hi to you.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for doing this for us. Really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to seeing you in
Thank
your whole
you.
show. And thank you so much.
Thank you.